Yeah, so here we go. Hello, Matthias, and welcome to the last tool talk of this year. That will be a Q&A with lots of questions you collected from last session, from other talks, and from the community.
Mm-hmm.
You already told that Power BI tools is getting more and more popular in terms of downloads, but also in terms of response. Oh, awesome stuff.
Yeah, super excited to be back. And we thought we'd do a slightly different session today because, first of all, to celebrate, we made it all the way to number 10. Secondly, it's right before the holidays. Thirdly, I actually had a few people reach out to me with a few questions. What and I generally don't like sort of answering questions one on one. I always prefer to try to let as many people as possible benefit. Quite a few people may have emailed me in the past, my general response is raise an issue on GitHub because that way everyone can actually see it and benefit from it. So that's basically how I aim to spend my time on this, because obviously this is all unpaid and pretty much all happening in my spare time. So yeah, there were a few questions, and so I thought, well, let's just make a whole session of it.
Hey, Donald.
And yeah, hey Donald, we met in Chicago earlier this year. Uh, been following each other on Twitter before. So yeah, super excited, looking forward. I've got a few questions already. Why don't I just sort of bring them up on the screen, get started with that, and then hopefully we'll get a few live questions as well, if that's okay.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So
Maybe just a short explanation. If anyone wants to join us live, you can do via the link in the description or the link I already posted. Then I can bring you to the screen here, and you can post your questions live. So Jenny was already here, and she has seen her questions already in your list, I think. And that's why she's not backstage anymore. Okay, so the questions are already posted, and you will answer them all. So
okay.
let's
Well,
go.
I'll try at least. First one is very easy. So will non-string parameters be able to handled in deployment manifest soon? That puzzled me a little bit because that's actually something which I released in July, so almost half a year ago. Clearly shows that I'm doing a poor job in sort of announcing and propagating those features. So let me, if we go to the pbi-tools website and the blog, this is one of the features I actually managed to write about. And as you can see, this is from July the 5th, basically announcing another update with respect to dataset deployments. And looking here on the new features, you can see non-string Power Query parameters were actually released back then. So if you scroll down, there's an extensive write-up, and this here is basically an example of the types of the data types and the types of parameters which are supported now. So you can put numbers there, you can put null there. Strings were always supported, obviously. Booleans are supported, and even Power Query expressions are supported. So basically, as far as I can tell, nothing that wouldn't be possible here. And just to explain the difference between a normal string and an expression. So basically, if the value in the manifest happens to start with a hash sign, then it's assumed to be an expression. The reason why that matters is because they will need to be encoded differently, basically. When it's a string, it needs double quotes. When it's an expression, it doesn't have double quotes. So that's why pbi-tools needs to know, and that's the rule for it. And there we go. So if whoever the question came from, if they are around and are able to join the chat, if there's anything to clarify. But again, this is supported in the RC2, and this blog post has it all documented. Null is also something which I can maybe demonstrate where that might be useful, and I'm not sure whether it's this one or that one. So let me have a look. So basically, if you follow a pattern which I've talked about a few times, here we go. So that's a pattern I usually mention when I talk about dataset development best practices, where for local development you want to make sure that a model refresh is as fast as possible, basically, right? So the pattern I normally use is to have one or several Power Query parameters where you filter, for instance, a fact table on a date. Or where you filter a fact table with a top n, something like that, just to make sure that there's only a subset of data to be loaded when you do a local refresh. So this would be an example where we've got a filter date set to the 1st of Jan 2009, and if we then go to our fact table query, which in this case is sales, and let me just zoom in here. We can see the very last step down here. That applies a conditional select rows. And the condition is whether or not the filter date parameter is null or has a value. And so basically this step is the difference between local versus production, right? And for this particular reason, it was actually necessary to support null as opposed to a valid string. So that was the specific need I actually had, for my own team, and I just went all the way and supported integers and booleans and all of that as well. Cool. Do we have any updates on that? Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So cool. Was just not aware, but guess it was quite useful talking about it. Right. So hard to understand changes since with respect to readability. Any suggestions on making extracted files more readable? So, I mean, that's definitely where I need some inputs. First of all, the whole purpose of why pbi-tools exists and what it does is to make the internal PBX code readable, right? So and everything it does with respect to actually formatting things and breaking them down into smaller chunks and smaller files is specifically for readability. So because I don't have any more context here, I can only assume that that's with respect to report changes. Because for data sets, we generally don't have much of a problem, I would say. Report changes tend to be quite verbose, depending on how many things you've done, how many the pages and visuals you've changed. And there's only so much that can be done, to be honest. Yeah, okay, so we just had a confirmation that this is for report changes. So there's only so much that can be done. So the short-term thing you can do is to ensure that you basically commit often and frequently, making sure that for individual Git commits, you have a relatively small change set, rather than working 8 hours on dozens of report changes and then committing everything at once, which will necessarily give you hundreds and hundreds of changes across many different files. So that's the only thing we can really do today, right? With respect to changing pbi-tools, there isn't really anything in the pipeline right now. And the reason for that is you may be aware that the Microsoft product team is working on something called desktop hardening, right? So that's this term desktop hardening has been around in the public domain. People have blogged about it. Matthew Roach, in particular, wrote a pretty extensive blog post about it. It's come up off Twitter before. It's quite a vague term. We don't really have a lot of details in terms of what that means and most importantly, what the timelines might be. But generally, those are internal initiatives at Microsoft which will address those kinds of problems, right? So which will allow understanding the inputs or the sources that make up reports, for instance, right? And for that reason, there's very little point in me trying to do much about that in terms of pbi-tools, because Microsoft is changing things. No one really knows when and how that will happen. So any effort I would put into this on the pbi-tools side right now would clearly be sort of in vain, whenever the Microsoft product team ships. I can see John just posted a note. Let me maybe do a little demo in terms of explaining what committing often and frequently means. So let me start off bringing down one particular repo, this one here. I'm just going to do this from scratch. First of all, because that way you can follow. Secondly, because I'm actually on a brand new machine, so I don't actually have anything pre-installed here. So if I do git clone and then cd into this new folder and open it up in VS Code, here we go. So that is a repo that happens to contain two thin reports with pbi-tools sources, right? So what I can do now is I can open a terminal and I can basically compile that into PBX file. So that would be pbi-tools compile. Then I'm referencing /report. And I don't need to do anything else because everything else is the default. Right, so I've got a file now, right? We can see that here. And I can open that one in desktop. And I've already linked desktop to my account, so it should actually be able to grab the data straight away. So here, source, report, here we go. Loads within seconds because of my new computer, which I'm very happy about. Right, so, in terms of committing often and frequently, one feature that's extremely handy is pbi-tools watch mode. I'm just fighting. Here we go. And in order to start that, you run pbi-tools info, which will give you a listing of all currently running sessions. Here we go. And the important thing here is to grab the process ID 41812. And I can then do pbi-tools extract -pid 41812-watch. There we go. So that puts pbi-tools in watch mode, which means it's now waiting for this file to have to change. And I can trigger a change very simply by actually pressing the save button within Power BI Desktop. You can see in the background stuff has happened here. So pbi-tools basically detected, it was saved, and then it ended up extracting things. And in conjunction with, for instance, VS Code in the source control window, we then actually get changes immediately. Now, at this point, because I didn't actually change anything, we're just going to have some metadata changes. So for instance, here we can see the report was previously saved with the February release of 22, whereas obviously I'm running the December release, which came out just yesterday, by the way. So I'm running the December release, and so we can see that in report metadata .json. We can also see here the internal the internal theme version number has changed. So this is all stuff that's sort of noise, but nonetheless still relevant. So I can basically get rid of this just by saying, for instance, upgraded to PBI desktop December 22, something like that, and commit all of that. And now my canvas is clear. I have no pending changes, and I can now go in and actually make something meaningful, right? So for instance, let's say I just want the title to say year rather than calendar year, right?
Jenny is asking a question about the layout.json. Layout.json seems always have to have a change, and she asks if it's possible to add it to git ignore.
So this is a new feature that was introduced a while ago. You know, when you have a thin report, you can now actually create and maintain this layout, basically your data model layout, right? And I think, let's see what the change was we actually had here. I think this is, I don't have the relevant extension installed yet. So let's just do another save and see whether we're getting yet another yeah, no, it's pretty stable right now. I think this may only change once each time you actually reopen the file. And it's normally tiny stuff like XY coordinates, which for some reason are always translated slightly differently. So, but as you can see, unless you go in here and move stuff around, I think it should actually be pretty stable with respect to this particular session, right? So yeah, you could decide either way. I don't think the file is necessary. I think it could actually be ignored, and it would still actually produce a valid PBIX, right? The other thing you could do. Can you? No, you can't delete it. Looks like one tab is always required. Otherwise, I would have suggested to completely remove that, but don't think that's possible. Yeah. Any other questions related here?
Not just a thank you from Jenny.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
About this, and yes, she confirms it is about the coordinates.
Yeah.
It's not a true change.
Yeah.
So
No, I totally understand, and it's definitely something I'm bothered by as well. But it's desktop hardening, really, right? So this is really something the product team needs to fix. We definitely don't want to sort of divert too much from the pbi-tools file contents in terms of what pbi-tools outputs, right? This is really just meant to be an extraction and a splitting into files. It's not meant to transform anything. So
besides that, there's just a suggestion about another session we can do about the reading of JSONs, but this is, yeah, why not?
Yes, so that
not
one
obvious,
is
not obvious JSONs.
No, so that one is a good one because I actually did a session specifically on. So I did like a 70-minute session or so where I specifically went through all the various artifacts that appear within the report of a PBIX file, precisely for that reason, right? And I happened to actually put that on my to-do list earlier today. I'm not joking, because I haven't. I have a recording of it, which sits on a SharePoint drive somewhere, and I need to actually download that and make it available on YouTube. So I've done all of it. That was. Interestingly, that was in Redmond on the Microsoft campus, where Stefan invited me to present at the local user group there. So it's relatively fresh because that was almost exactly a month ago. Yeah, so let me grab that, upload to YouTube, and then publicize. Cool. So the one change I was talking about earlier, renaming this from calendar year to year, I've now done. So what I would then propose in terms of process, click save, have pbi-tools extract the stuff, and then we can see now things are really clean, right? Because the one change I made is in this particular case comes through as a very simple change with respect to the code changes. So I can go in here and can now say renamed slicer header to year or something like that, right? Oops, and then confirm. One thing to be aware of, by convention, this root level PBIX proj file always updates the last modified. there's an issue right now where some people and one person in particular is quite keen for me to turn that off because it does get quite noisy, particularly when you're using watch mode. So yeah, I'm considering either completely removing this or making it an option. So for the time being, just ignore this file when it comes to making those small incremental commits.
As long as you're still in the model here, John has a question. Where can you find the report level measures?
Yes. So they are currently not stored in a very accessible way. So basically the file is config.json inside the report folder. So I don't think I've got any in here. No. So let me create one and then we'll see what it looks like. So if I go in here and basically do a new measure and call this number of customers. There we go, and then that would just be a row count of my customer table. Here we go. So that's my report level measure, and let's just make sure that this works. There we go. Awesome. And I can slice that, let's say by country. Here we go. Cool. So that works. Let's save. And if we then focus on this config.json file, we can see it's yellow, which means there's a change in here. If I go here, there we go. So that's it. It's a top-level property called model extensions, and the format is we have an array which represents our tables. And then this one happens to have an array of measures where each measure is a JSON object containing name, data type, expression, so on and so forth. So that's what it looks like. I was considering at some point, and in fact, I'm pretty sure there's an open issue on GitHub to explicitly extract those into separate files. But again, that is probably effort that would be sort of invalidated once Microsoft does some updates to the report formats. Any other questions since we're here?
No, not in the moment. Just
Okay.
a thank you from John.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that has sorted 1 and 2. Deployment pipelines. pbi-tools does not interact with deployment pipelines. I don't like them. I mean, to give my very honest opinion, deployment pipelines are obviously a premium feature, which I think is a very questionable decision. From my point of view, that should actually be a pro feature, because anyone who is on premium would probably not find deployment pipelines good enough for their purposes. But that's just my very own unfiltered opinion. And then we have so obviously the model with Power BI deployment pipelines is that you basically replicate the exact same setup between different workspaces, which means there are no everything is called the same in terms of report and dataset names. They just happen to be in different workspaces, right? And then the question is, why am I prefixing or suffixing things in my examples? That's a choice, and you may well choose not to do that, right? So let me open up the other example.
Donald agrees that it should be a pro feature.
Cool. So if I open up this one. Here we go. Yeah. So this is my sort of textbook example for dataset deployments, and what I've done here is let me just make this a little bigger so you can all see. Right, so we've got our traditional 3 environments here: dev, UAT, production, and you can see that this is actually split across 2 different workspaces, not because I want to propose that, but I just wanted to demonstrate that it's a possibility, right? So here I don't have a 3rd workspace, which means obviously if we then want to mix and match artifacts corresponding to different environments, we need to name them somehow differently, right? And so I really just put this in here as an example that that's a possibility, right? I didn't put that in here as an example to somehow propose that this is the best or only way you should do it, right? So there are many different possibilities. For instance, you could have a dedicated UAT workspace, and in that case, you wouldn't even have to specify a display name, because a missing display name means that we're just defaulting to the folder name. So in that case, the dataset would be called Contoso Sales, as is the name of the folder where the sources are, right? So that's a possibility. I personally prefer to suffix non-production data sets, because if you then go into your data hub in Power BI, and you happen to have loads and loads of different data sets in here, you can see at a glance and very easily whether a particular data set happens to be dev or staging or production, right? Production won't be marked explicitly, but all the others will have a dedicated suffix, and that's my personal preference. Particularly, when you're looking at a relatively large tenant, then you don't have to, cross-check, what might the workspace be. You can also see that the workspace column happens to be quite far away from where the dataset name is. And so obviously that's something Power BI deployment pipelines would not allow you to do, right? But you've got a lot more flexibility using pbi-tools. At the end of the day, you have to find a system that works for you, right? So was there anything else? Can you configure which dataset a report is connected to during deployment? This one is quite interesting, because I have to say this happens to be the most requested feature right now, which is a very that was very unexpected. I get this all the time, even from my own team. People seem to want that more than anything else. It's not currently supported, even though I've actually done all the backend work to make that a possibility. So I promise you, in the new year, I'll be working on this. It's just not a possibility earlier than January or February. But I have already promoted this particular issue. So if you go to the pbi-tools repository and go to issues, you'll see that there we go. Look at that. So it's already pinned. So basically, those 3. They are currently next in line, if you will, in terms of new features. So yeah, sorry. However, what I just said relates to thin reports. When it comes to thick reports, basically where we have a report and a model in the same PBX file, right? Do I have that in here? No, I don't have it in here. I need to go to another demo, which I'm pretty sure is that one. Yes, here we go. Right. So this is a relatively new feature as well. And what I'm talking about is this. So basically, if we're deploying a data set which happens to have an embedded report, so basically a report in the same PBX file, and you set this property, deploy embedded report true, then two artifacts will be deployed. So the data set will be deployed using XMLA, and then the report will be converted to a thin report and will then be deployed as a thin report separately, but connected to the data set. And that one actually allows you to customize the name of that report. I don't have that in the example here, but the format for that, if I'm not mistaken, would be this. Right. So it would be report, and then display name, and here you can put anything you want. Yeah. So I appreciate it's not what you asked for, but it's somehow related in terms of dynamically connecting thin reports to different data sets. Please bear with me. Are there any follow-ups on that one? No.
No, I think it's okay now.
All right. Best practices maintaining multiple models with multiple reports. Is having one repo with many different deployments better, or better separate out the repository altogether? Right. So in my own practice, I very strictly distinguish between model development and report development. I generally have different people on that, as well as there are different release. There's a different release cadence. And so what I'm trying to say is whether or not you're splitting repos, it should very much depend on your organizational setup in terms of, first of all, who's working on it, and would changes on reports always coincide with changes on the model, or are they relatively disconnected, right? If it's the same people and changes are always synchronized, then it makes a lot of sense keeping it in the same repo. Otherwise not, right? So it's one of those, it depends, right? If this were a guy in the cube, I would have to put the dollar in the jar now. It's also a balance, right? I mean, you don't want to have a proliferation of too many tiny repositories, but at the same time, you don't want to have one gigantic repository that has everything in it, where people then constantly step on each other's feet. The separation between model development on the one hand and report development on the other hand does work quite well for me and my own team. Okay, and right, one golden data set and dozens of reports. Right, so obviously that literally is the golden standard, right? That's what every organization should aim for, and that's precisely what I would very much promote as well. So pretty much what I just explained still applies here. As far as the golden data set is concerned, I follow a pretty strict release and versioning model, which I've spoken about at various occasions. Let me just show you where to find the references for that. So first of all, if you go to the pbi-tools website, there's a new section here called resources, which I put in place maybe 2 months ago. That's a up-to-date list of all presentations and talks and tutorials. Sorry. I've done relating to pbi-tools, so you can see there's a lot of stuff here, and the sorry, the session I've got in mind here is this one in particular, the branching model. And that one happens to have a dedicated section on the website as well, which you can find here. So there's a recording available, which is here, and then all related write-ups are in this section on the website. And at the end of the day, it actually comes down to what I've put into this diagram, which basically explains how using Git and branches goes together with a release and versioning model. And the gist of it basically is that new releases are planned with respect to their scope and with respect to what goes into the release. Modern issue trackers and DevOps systems help quite nicely with that. You then start off with creating a new release or integration branch targeting the upcoming new version of your dataset in that case, and then individual developers will basically branch off that release branch, work on specific issues, which can then be integrated iteratively, step by step, back into the release branch. If you then combine that with deployment automation in such a way that, and this is actually explained here, in such a way that every time a developer pushes updates onto an open feature, the model is compiled and deployed into a dev environment. Every time something gets integrated into the staging area for the new release, the model is compiled and deployed into the staging or UAT environment. And finally, once the new release is integrated into the main branch, which represents production, we trigger a production deployment, and we also tag this particular version with our release number. So that's the gist of it. And again, for golden data sets, that works very well in my experience, and something I'm sort of a big fan of, if you will, because from my point of view, there is basically a commitment here, right? If you have a golden data set, you're basically serving a potentially relatively large number of users, right? Possibly even users you don't even know, right? So which means there are some requirements that come with that. You will have to avoid breaking changes. Otherwise, you might break someone's report in a completely different region or department, and you may not even know that they've got that dependency on your model. Things like that is what you need to think about. Again, I've done that recording, and I've talked about this at various conferences. In fact, I'm going to do another conference talk about this in March.
Here's Jenny again.
Yes, structure should deployments be in one, or can look at that are defined in each model report? Yeah, good question. First of all, in terms of what pbi-tools needs, if I just go back here, sorry. So this is a deployment manifest. Obviously, there's only one deployment in here right now. And if I wanted to run that deployment, the command for that is pbi-tools deploy. And then the next argument is actually a reference, is actually a folder reference. I generally show this example, basically putting a dot there, which is a relative reference to the current folder. Then that would be followed by the deployment label. If I want to check things without actually changing anything, I can do what if, and here we go. I'm getting an error message, and why is that? Because I don't actually have the correct credential set, which is expected, right? So that's precisely why there's a what if, so you can test things. Now, coming back to your question, it means that you actually have some options here in terms of this second argument. You could easily refer to any other folder which contains a manifest, right? So again, this is a choice. Technically, it's possible to have a single manifest defining any number of profiles in the root, or you could distribute them into subfolders. That all works as long as this particular command has the correct reference. My own personal preference is to actually have all deployments defined in the root folder of the repository, pretty much have them all in one place rather than actually scattering them across different files.
Okay, so no pending questions so far.
Actually, that's a good one, because I thought I had set the secret, but looks obviously that's expired now. So yeah, that's got nothing to do with my with my new computer. That's just something I need to check in my tenant. Yeah, so that's actually a good example as well. When developing the deployment feature, I made some extra effort making sure that error messages and security-related error messages in particular are exposed in a readable way. So this is what you can see here, right? If I hadn't done that, that error message would actually be hidden away and would be very poorly formatted. So hopefully that helps. As you can see, right, Azure Active Directory normally emits very meaningful error messages. Oftentimes they even have references where you can find additional details. So given that that's quite likely, hurdle that you will encounter when setting up a new pipeline, it's definitely quite useful being able to see what those errors are. So yeah, hopefully that is a useful pointer as well. And it also shows that when running a what if deployment, the credentials are actually validated. All right. So I don't think there's anything else here. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, also no pending questions in the chat.
All
There have
right.
been a lot of interaction today. I think the Q&A was worth it, definitely. So thanks especially Jenny and Donald and John for very active participation here. It's okay. The most thanks are, of course, to you, Matthias, because yeah, you deserved as well. So for myself, I also have like some obvious questions about releases and new features and all the stuff, but you can read it on your site. So it should be more about the usage of it, and yeah, it's quite cool that you have shown again this auto compile the watch mode. I like this a lot. It's one of my favorites because I still work a lot in the Power BI desktop itself and not only in the code. And also the desire to see the JSON structure more clearly was also been visible here, and there will be a video in very short time. Matthias already has it.
Indeed, yeah. Hopefully it's still available for download, but I know who to talk to if not. Cool.
Some real good questions today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks to all the viewers, and yeah, of course, this will stay recorded as always. And yeah, see you again, Matthias.
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe not the last session, only the last for this year, I think.
Yeah.
But Power BI tools will live on, and I'm quite excited about all the stuff you're telling. Microsoft is planning something big, and they will be changing lots of stuff. Yeah, will be quite cool times.
Yeah,
Upcoming.
well, but just to clarify, no one knows
Yeah.
about when, what, and how, right? So
Yeah.
this is all just based on stuff that's in the public domain
Yeah.
around desktop hardening at the
Yeah.
moment.
Just some rumors about different things are around, but nothing real, yeah, in detail. But Microsoft themselves, they told at Ignite that there will be big changes. Just don't have told which changes there will be. So we stay tuned, and yeah, thanks again, and yeah, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, Matthias. If we don't do not see each other in yeah, maybe some other sessions, not of us both. So I will have a last session the next Wednesday with Michael.
Oh,
Also
cool.
one English session about decks and yeah, some dex tricks to show some special curves.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Happy holidays to everyone, no matter which holiday you're celebrating. I hope you
Yeah, of
do
course.
get. I hope you do get some nice time with your family by the end of the year. Absolutely looking forward to Tool Talk number 11 as well. Hope we can make that happen in January.
Yeah, of course. So see you in 23.
Absolutely.
Goodbye to
Okay.
everyone.
Yeah, bye.
Cool. Ja, hat doch Spaß gemacht hier, dass wir so viele Fragen beantworten konnten. Echt nice.
It's still showing as live.
Oh, wait.